For over 65 years, there's been this one story from the frozen peaks of Russia's Ural Mountains that has just captivated and terrified people. It's the story of 9 incredibly experienced hikers who met a truly bizarre and horrifying end. So let's dive right into this enduring mountain
Right off the
mystery.
bat, this is the question at the heart of the entire Dyatlov Pass incident. I mean, everything else we're going to talk about hinges on this one seemingly insane decision. Why would you flee the only shelter you have and run out into a frozen wasteland? What could possibly have been more terrifying inside that tent than the blizzard waiting
Our story
outside?
really begins on February 26, 1959. That's when a search party finally found the hikers' abandoned camp. It was on a desolate slope the local Mansi people call Kholat Syakhl, which translates to Mountain of the Dead. And yeah, what they found there, it only made things a whole lot
The
weirder.
scene was just baffling. The tent was collapsed, sure, but all their gear, their cameras, their diaries, all their warm clothes, it was all just sitting there, untouched. But the really crucial clue was the tent fabric itself. You could see the cuts were pushed outward, which means someone sliced it open from the inside. And leading away from this bizarre scene, footprints. Some of them from people who weren't even wearing shoes, in 30 below zero
This
weather.
right here is the first major puzzle that stumped investigators. Slashing your way out of a tent, that screams absolute terror, right? An immediate, desperate need to escape. But the footprints in the snow told a completely different story. They were calm, orderly, evenly spaced. It looked like the group just walked, not ran, away from the camp. So you have this moment of intense panic, and then calm. It just didn't add up at
These
all.
people. Before we get any deeper into the clues, it's really important to remember that this wasn't a group of amateurs. No way. These were highly skilled, Grade 2 certified hikers from the Ural Polytechnical Institute. So let's go back to the beginning of their
whole
journey. Expedition started out pretty normal. 10 students set out for what was supposed to be a challenging but totally achievable trek. But just 5 days in, one of them, Yuri Yudin, had to turn back because he got sick. A real twist of fate that ended up making him the sole survivor of the group. By February 1st, the other 9 set up their final camp. And in their last diary entry, they describe the conditions as windy, sure, but they also write about this sense of peace and quiet. Nothing
This line,
seemed wrong.
written
by the group's leader, Igor Dyatlov. It's just haunting to read now. It's filled with that kind of adventurous spirit you'd totally expect. But knowing what was about to happen, well, it reads like a chilling
So
premonition.
the
The
search
search for the hikers turned into this grim 2-month-long recovery effort. And with every single discovery they made, the case just got stranger and stranger. Honestly, the clues they found with the bodies are what took this whole thing from a tragic hiking accident and turned it into a legendary
Bodies
mystery.
were
Found in 3 distinct groups. The first 2 were discovered about a mile downhill by a big cedar tree right next to the remains of a small fire. They were barefoot and only wearing their underwear. The next 3 were found scattered between that tree and the tent, almost like they were trying to get back to camp before they died from the cold. But it was the last 4, found 2 months later in a nearby ravine, that presented the biggest shock of all. This is absolutely crucial. The last 4 hikers had suffered these catastrophic internal injuries. I mean, we're talking fractured skulls and completely crushed chests, but with no major cuts or bruises on the outside of their bodies. The medical examiner was blunt about it. He said the force required to do that was immense, like being hit by a car, and that it could not have been done by another person. On top of all that, there was the bizarre soft tissue damage, missing eyes, and, in one case, a missing tongue. The case took a very, very
Let's
dark
just remember the
turn. Backdrop for all of this. It was minus 30 degrees Celsius. 30 below. The fact that anyone was outside at all, let alone with hardly any clothes on, is just mind-boggling. These were experienced hikers. They knew that in those conditions, your clothing is your lifeline. As if things weren't strange enough, investigators found that a couple of articles of clothing had significant traces of radioactive material on them. Now, you gotta remember, this is the middle of the Cold War, out in the remote Soviet wilderness. A discovery like that was like throwing gasoline on a fire. The speculation just went wild. With evidence this bizarre, you've got violent internal injuries, radioactivity, a tent slashed from the inside. It's no wonder that a whole host of theories popped up, from the kind of plausible to the totally paranormal, trying to explain what happened up on that mountain. So for many, many years, the most common and sort of official explanation was a simple avalanche. The idea is that a slab of snow slid down and the hikers had to cut their way out of the tent in a panic to avoid being buried alive. That theory has some major problems. For one, the tent was collapsed, but it wasn't flattened, and it was only covered by a little bit of snow. Plus, Igor Dyatlov was an expert. He would have known not to set up camp in a place with a high risk of avalanches. And other expeditions to that same spot have never found any evidence of avalanche conditions
That
there.
radioactivity, combined with some reports from other people about strange lights in the sky around that time, led to some really sensational theories. Was it a secret Soviet military weapon test that went wrong? Or, as some people even suggested, was it an encounter with a UFO? The last photo taken on their camera is this strange, blurry image of lights, which only added fuel to that fire.
The physical evidence just isn't there. The search party was incredibly thorough. If a missile had hit or a craft had crashed, they would have found something. Debris, an impact crater, anything. But the snow was completely undisturbed except for the hikers' own footprints. The whole scene was pristine. Okay, if it wasn't an avalanche and it wasn't some secret weapon, then what actually happened? Well, if you carefully piece together all these different clues, the stove, the calm footsteps, the different types of injuries, a much more down-to-earth and maybe even more tragic story starts to emerge.
Let's walk through the most plausible reconstruction. It starts with the group using a makeshift stove inside their tent. They probably had a cooked meal. But it's very likely the stove's exhaust pipe, which they had put together themselves, malfunctioned. Smoke, or worse, invisible carbon monoxide, began to fill the small tent, and they started to choke. In a disoriented panic, they slash the tent to get fresh air. Once they're outside, the immediate danger is over, so they walk calmly to a shelter spot they already knew about, that big cedar tree. Then the 4 best-dressed members head to a nearby ravine to gather firewood, and that's where a small, localized snowslide tragically crushes them against the rocks, causing those horrific internal injuries. The remaining 5, now underdressed and without their warmest companions, simply freeze to death.
What's really compelling is that this theory also neatly explains all those other sensational clues. The radioactivity, well, it was traced back to the clothing of 2 hikers who actually worked in secret nuclear plants. It was just contamination from their jobs. The missing eyes and tongue, a grim thought, but it's a natural result of scavenging animals in the months before the bodies were found. And coughing up blood, that's a classic symptom of severe smoke inhalation. All of a sudden, the bizarre pieces really start to fit together.
The original investigators in 1959 closed the case, concluding that an unknown compelling force had caused the deaths, but that there was no evidence of any criminal act. They were basically stumped, but they knew it wasn't murder. Of course, that vague conclusion is what allowed the mystery to grow and grow for decades.
That's where we're left. We have a choice. Is this a logical, even if horrifying, chain of terrible events? A faulty stove, a small avalanche, and a brutal blizzard all coming together at the worst possible time? Or does the Mountain of the Dead still hold on to a secret that we haven't quite figured out yet? The debate, as you can imagine, continues.